I do have quite a bit of experience in the industry on different aspects, inspection definitely being one of them. As a former chief inspector of Tennessee, I learned a lot that jurisdictions all operate differently, even though we may operate under the NBIC, as we know, and some of your listeners may know, is the National Board Inspection Code. It has four parts in it. Inspection is one of them. The other is installation, and then you have repair and alteration, which I'm the vice chair of that committee. We got a meeting coming up in Salt Lake City in July, so I'm looking forward to getting together with my colleagues there. And then the fourth part is going to be pressure relief devices, safety valves, so on and so forth. And even though most jurisdictions, when I say jurisdictions, instead of just saying states, because you have some municipalities that have their own individual laws. Detroit is one of them. Milwaukee, I know, is another. New York City is another. They can all operate a little bit differently based on their rules and regulations that they have. State of Tennessee, one of the things that really, I don't want to say shocked me, may surprise me a little bit, but it more than that, it opened my eyes, is when I did become chief inspector and going and sitting in the chiefs meeting where Mother's Day weekend, they have the National Board Convention, which just recently was held in Denver. 6 months from that, they have the chiefs meeting in Columbus, Ohio, where it's really just the chief inspectors and advisory get together. And sitting in that meeting, it really opened my eyes to recognize that jurisdictions operate a little bit differently. It may be safe, but you may require two inspections a year on high pressure boiler versus another jurisdiction only requiring one. And it's that's where the NBIC kind of allows for those jurisdictions um, to make up their own decisions. So you'll see throughout the NBIC, it'll say the requirements as required by the jurisdiction or something like that. And so it's gonna say things like, "Hey, you need to do this." Um, but only if their jurisdiction requires it.
The common catch-all is, hey, this is what we suggest, but always refer to the authority
That's
having
right.
jurisdiction. And so the authority having jurisdiction, so if you're in Detroit, does the state have ultimate jurisdiction over Detroit? Or can Detroit just say, like, hey, this boiler's legal in our city and we don't care what the state says?
That's a very valid point. I don't want to speak directly to Detroit. I can speak to my experience with the city of Memphis back when I was working for the state of Tennessee. And it was very interesting, but I was a deputy inspector stationed out of Jackson, Tennessee. And for those that don't know where that is, it's roughly about halfway in between Nashville and Memphis, a little bit closer on the Memphis side. And so, what that meant at that particular time when I was there, and that was more the early to mid '90s, was that I would go all the way down to Shelby County. And even though Memphis Shelby County was treated like a metro area, no different than Nashville Davidson County is when government. The requirement of the national board at that particular time was that it was really only the city of Memphis that could have their own membership to the national board. And there was an individual by the name of Max Lovelady, who was the chief inspector of Memphis. Well, as a deputy, I would go down to Shelby County outside of the city limits and go to locations. And while I was there, I would see that there would be a boiler certificate for the city of Memphis on the boiler. And that kind of raised an attention. And I kind of brought it to the chief inspector at the time, Don Tanner, and said, hey, they're kind of crossing over the city line here. And so what ended up happening, because it wasn't Metro ran government, is Shelby County code enforcement would require a permit to be issued for the installation of a boiler or a water heater, so on and so forth. And they really wouldn't come back out and re-inspect it. What they would do, especially on the water heaters, is they would issue that certificate. The certificate would be issued for water heater number one. And then over the course of the years, every couple of years, they would get an invoice for said operating certificate, but that water heater had been replaced 2 or 3 times. And so that's what we kind of found. And so that's when the state of Tennessee got involved, reached out to Memphis, and we said, hey, look, you guys are not adhering to the laws, rules, and regulations of the state of Tennessee. So to go back to your question, and I would assume Detroit would be the same way, is that the rules and regulations for the individual municipality have to equate or exceed those requirements of the state. And if they don't, then the state has every opportunity to come in and take over. And so that's in essence what we did. Shelby County was not very happy with the state about that. Let's just say, if you could imagine, I've seen it in movies where one lawyer asks for evidentiary disclosure, and next thing you know, this big truck pulls up with like cartons and cartons of papers. Well, that's kind of what happened with us in Shelby County. Is like, well, here you go figure it out. And that's when we really started figuring out that what they were doing is just sending an invoice over the years and not really coming out and inspecting. And so ever since then, we obviously had to hire additional inspectors to cover Shelby County. Just that area, I think, has 3 inspectors in it now. So for the state of Tennessee. So that's kind of how that works, Eric.
Okay. And what is the role of, if a jurisdiction has one, a chief boiler inspector?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to your initial question when we scheduled this was, what is the National Board? The full name is the National Board of Boiler and Pressure Vessel Inspectors. The thing is it has grown significantly over the history of the National Board, to where when you have certain accidents that occurred in history, that really shot the rocket off, if you would, to say, hey, we need some regulatory oversight. And so that's where we look into the ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and also the National Board. History could probably take you back to the boiler accident in Brockton, Massachusetts, where a boiler exploded, not only devastated the factory, a lot of the homes that were around the factory, number of people died from that. And that really kind of set off of why we needed to have a uniform code. That's where the ASME started from. 1919, the National Board was created. Let's bring that together. Let's control how we inspect these boilers, how we install these boilers, how we repair these boilers. That's really where a lot of that came from. And the National Board does a lot more than that. Right now, Joe L'Amato is the current executive director of the National Board. He and I, we could say that we, in essence, grew up in the National Board together. We were both members at the same time. And he, I respect all former executive directors tremendously. I just have a great passion for Joel and the job he's done with the National Board. He's done an amazing job, and he's the best person I could have thought whenever Dave Doohan decided he was going to retire. Dave Doohan took over for Don Tanner when Don Tanner passed, and both of those guys did a terrific job. Dave really did a great job bringing the National Board together, and now Joel is doing a magnificent job in his role there, and it's really a team effort up there. They have a lot of different things that they do. If you've never been to the National Board in Columbus, Ohio, to be able to visit that location, the training facility up there is second to none. They have a valve shop that is critically important to the certification of all pressure relief devices. That's an amazing operation. During my time there, Joe Ball was over that. He since has retired, and he was tremendous, and his replacement is doing a wonderful job up there now too. As we talked about the inspectors being certified, there is a certification exam for that. That has changed tremendously over the decades that I've been involved with it. They do a tremendous job with training. As you and I are both in, have our toes in that industry. I know good training when I see it, and I know bad training when I hear it. And National Board is really good with their training department up there is second to none. They really care about getting the word out there. I've talked with Joel many times about, where I can assist in that area. Kimberly is her director up there of training, and she is, I've known her for decades, and she has been tremendous up there. And so they do the training, they do certification. They're the caretaker of the National Board Inspection Code. And so when people think, hey, it's named National Board of Boiler and Pressure Vessel Inspectors, the assumption is all it is some, hey, we're going to send you a bill and you pay for a license. It's more than just that. It's tremendously more than just that.
That's good. So to clarify and wrap up the last question, so the chief boiler inspector is going to be somebody that is essentially leading a jurisdiction and saying, like, I would say that like they would be like the president of the jurisdiction, saying like, hey, this is what we're going to do, this is what's important, and really driving the initiatives and making sure that all the local codes and regulations in their jurisdiction are being followed and that all the deputy inspectors are doing what they need to do. Is that essentially what the job is?
Yeah, I would say more specifically, the chief inspector is the representative of the jurisdiction. In that case, they are going to be the highest ranking commissioned inspector for that jurisdiction. So in most cases, not all, but in most cases, that individual is going to be a highly ranked civil servant. And I use that term loosely because I know some jurisdictions have gone away from that, using the terms civil servant or got rid of that. But really, that's what it is. It's not really a political appointee. Okay. They have to have a commission. All right. It doesn't mean that they have to have all the endorsements that come along with that commission, but they do have to have a commission to be considered a chief inspector. They are going to represent, and the national board sends them to meetings, sponsors those chief inspectors in the way of replenishing any expenses to go to meetings. Some jurisdictions don't allow that. Some jurisdictions say, well, that's a conflict, so we're going to pay for your way, or don't let them go at all. And that's kind of a shame because what happens is when you have 50, 60, I don't know what the number is right now, how many chief inspectors in North America, including the United States and provinces of Canada. It's a shame because a lot of times you only see a handful of the same chiefs representing and doing the volunteer work. So as we discussed before, me serving on the NBIC comes out of my pocket. My company, ECS Consulting and the Boy Scout Training Group, pays for me to go to these meetings. So the week that I'm going to be in Salt Lake City, I'm losing money. You know this. You've been there. It's like
Yeah, just put it on the company card.
It's like so.
Wait,
Yeah,
I am the
it's
company.
like my accountant's going, oh, good grief. But yeah, and so to get these inspectors, these chief inspectors, to be able to participate. It's written in the bylaws for the NBIC that allows for the NBIC to reimburse for these expenses and pay for the hotel rooms and pay for the flights. And these chiefs aren't getting paid by the national board, and that was a misconception for a lot to argue that all the time. What the states do is they allow for them to go. Obviously, they're getting paid for the state. They're doing state business because they're representing their state at these code meetings and being a voice at these code meetings and having the ayes and nays when things are being voted. If they feel like that it's not beneficial to the code, beneficial to the rules and regulations, they have representation there because the other people that are in these code meetings are going to be repair companies, manufacturing companies, insurance companies. And we're going to talk a lot more about the difference between state and insurance. And so what you end up getting is if representation of the inspection side of it is just the insurance entities or the authorized inspection agencies, as they're called, you're not really getting the enforcement side being represented if we don't have chief inspectors being sent to these meetings. And it's something that when I was a member of the state of Tennessee, always supported the chief inspectors, all the way back to the days of Lynn Peel, whenever the state law was enacted in 1949, up through Charlie Allison was there. His grandson is actually of Fred Allison is actually a boiler inspector. So you see a lot of these kind of going down the family tree, and Morris Snow up to Don Tanner. To me, I was the fifth chief inspector of the state of Tennessee, and every one of us were supporting, and they still support. A lot of jurisdictions don't do that, and that's a shame.
Yes, I know because I gathered some data on all the boilers in the United States. A state like Idaho doesn't have a boiler division,
Mm-hmm.
or even like New Mexico. I called the state of Idaho, and I got some guy from the HVAC or something. He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, we don't really do that around here.
Yeah.
Which was shocking because I was like, man, this is like normal in all these other states, and you guys don't do this? And he's like, no. And that's the importance of understanding what goes on in the United States and getting
Mm-hmm.
together with other chief inspectors and understanding what other jurisdictions are doing, because even though, we have the internet and instant communication, it's always best to get together in person at a certain point and to share ideas, what's happening, trends, and like, hey, we really should be looking out for this and all that stuff versus just living in your own jurisdiction and ignoring the outside world.
Yeah, that's true. And that's kind of what I was talking about whenever I said my eyes were opened, is when I realized not everybody enforces their laws the way we do. Not everybody holds accountable. And it was very shocking because, as a young, early 30-something-year-old, man, I just thought, and we talked about this, I just thought I knew everything. Oh my gosh, I was so naive. And, I would stand up in those meetings. As you can see, I'm not very shy. And I would stand up in those meetings, not just blowing hard, but actually almost asking the question and say, you know, I don't understand why, you've got the code. Why don't you just enforce this? And they would just look and they would shake their head and say, young buck, you'll learn, you learn. And then I realized the politics that are involved in a lot of this, not speaking harshly or anything like that, but, there's talk like Texas. Texas is an example when I look at it and I say, okay, Texas has a boiler law, but they don't have the pressure vessel side of that, the unfired pressure vessel law. And so they have the law that says, okay, if you have a boiler, we're going to regulate that. But if you have an unfired pressure vessel, like air storage or chemical or whatever, we're not going to regulate that. Okay. And in essence, why? You say, well, because what do they have in Texas? What kind of industry is in Texas? It's your refineries, right? A lot of refineries. And so they start writing that and they say, okay, well, what do refineries have a lot of? They have a lot of pressure vessels. Okay. And you start looking at them saying, I see where that can come from. the lobbyist part of that saying, "Hey, well, we'll regulate ourselves. We don't need the state regulating. We'll take care of ourselves." Now that doesn't mean that they aren't safe. They follow things like API 510 and things of that nature whenever they're looking at repairing those vessels and things of that nature. But there's no cost for certifications and operating permits and things of that nature. So that's a little different. I mean, great example of governmental interference, if you would, or outside forces interfering with the government is state of Tennessee a couple years ago had a strong lobby group come in and did not like the fact that steam generators on autoclave units came in and pressured legislature to exempt them. So what does that mean? It's if you have an autoclave in a hospital used for sterilizing purposes and it had a integral, now we know the name what that means, it's part of the sterilizer is a steam generator underneath it, it's now exempt from inspection requirements in the state of Tennessee.
What's the difference between a boiler and a steam generator?
Well, it's just the water level. You have steam generator. When we talk about a steam generator, we're generating steam in both units, but you don't have a fixed water level.
Got it. Yeah. So it would be just a very, very small integral
Relatively,
unit
relatively,
that
yeah.
is, yeah. But you can also, like the larger
Mhm.
steam generators are made something like by Vapor Power or Clayton
Yeah.
Thermogenics,
hmm Yeah, you can. Yeah.
where it's hot water getting pumped through a
Mhm.
coil and then it spans in a tank, which then makes steam.
That's right. Yeah, it's really released where that tank does not have a water level. You're sensing your water level inside of the tube bundle, and then it's going to have a separator that will then separate a unit that will then separate the steam from the coil itself. And then in some cases, a lot of cases, everybody has different designs, but it's going to capture that steam to give it more volume. The issue that you have with steam generators, they are very safe. Don't get me wrong; they're very safe. Unit has all the bells and whistles in it. It's got a lot quicker startup, but does not have the volume of some of your larger units. That's the volume of steam. Kind of a very layman way of putting it. Both have their place in the industry. That's for sure.
So you've mentioned commission.
hmm
What is the National Board Commission? Who would get one and how do you get it?
Great question. I'm going to speak to you of somebody that I received my commission in 1993. I think 93 is when I received it.
The year I was born?
I'm going to totally block you now from my phone. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Eric. But yes, the year you were born, I got my commission. Anyway, so at that time, who is getting the commission? Well, here's the thing is that you have to be employed by a jurisdiction slash authorized inspection agency to be able to get a commission. So now who is that? Well, when I got my commission, there was only two avenues of that. You were working for a state or province or municipality. That's one. Or you were working for an insurance company. Your Hartford Steam Boiler, your Traveler, your Factory Mutual, your Chubb Insurance, your Ace Property and Casualty, goes on and on and on, right? Some of those are debunked now. Some of those got out of the industry. Your Hartford Steam Boiler is your oldest, most prominent. Now, I'll hear it from somebody who listens to this that works for Factory Mutual at one of these meetings and give me a hard time. And it's like just they just have a cooler logo. Let's move on. And so that's how it was. And that has since changed in a way because when you look at a lot of the rules that are out there, it says that writes insurance. Well, That's not really how it works. And you'd be better suited probably to get one of these insurance guys up here to tell you the different levels of how they underwrite and write insurance. But mostly, if we think about it as boiler machinery inspection services. And so what we're looking at is somebody that has been authorized through the national board to provide inspection services can have commissioned inspectors. And they have a list of those. You can go onto the National Board website, be able to look in and who are those individual companies. And so you have a few of those that have popped up that don't really write an insurance, but they provide those inspection services. And as long as you're accredited, okay, with the National Board, and you work for one of those companies, you can get a commission. I no longer have a commission. The minute that I resigned from the national board and the boiler trustees, based on the fact of me leaving the state of Tennessee, I gave up my commission. You know, I can still tell you it's 11,594. And if ever I decided, you know, at the ripe old age of 58 years old that I want to go back, you know, kicking water heaters and boilers, and I went to work for somebody, or started my own inspection services company, which that ain't going to happen either, I could get my commission back, and it would be this, 11,594. Um, so now, how did that go? How do you go about getting a commission? Number one, you 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 put in the request to take the test. Now, you don't have to work for an inspection agency to be able to sit for the national board. You can be a civilian out here. You could be Eric Johnson that says, hey, you know what? I would like to sit for the National Board Commission exam.
Is there a requirement to sit, or can I just pay a fee and say, hey, I just want to sit in this test and see how I do?
Yeah. That's exactly it. You don't have to have X amount of experience to sit for it. Now, being issued a commission, it used to be a lot harder. I think it's become more lenient. We'll go into that, why that is, because the test has completely changed from when I took it. When I took the test, it was a day and a half long. The first day was all mathematical calculations to inspect boilers, right? And so what you had to do is, I'll give you an example. There was a compensation problem. They'll give you the makeup of the nozzle to be installed into the shell. In the question, it'll give you understanding of which code you have to use, and you have to figure out the calculation for compensating the fact that you're removing metal to put this nozzle in. I remember this, and I was a pretty smart dude, right? And we talked about that. Arrogance is not bliss. Arrogance will kick you in the teeth. And I'm walking around, they're calling, because I'm the young guy, and they're calling me the golden child. And I'm, strutting around there. Yeah, I sat for that exam, and I felt like somebody beat me with a bat by the time I was done. And that compensation problem took me 5 pages to answer, because you had to write out all your answers. It was not your little Scantron bubble. Yeah, they didn't do that back then. It was, you got blank pieces of paper and you had to show your work. Bob Schuler, we've talked about Bob. Love Bob to death. He was a great man, very knowledgeable, but boy, he would be the thorn in your side. But he really cared about the codes. Well, Bob was the one who wrote those questions. Bob was the one who sat and graded those exams. And if you didn't show your work, you would get parts of it. You might come and get a quarter point instead of a whole point. However they grade it, it's like you would get a half point because you missed this step, or you did it in your head and didn't show your work. And so that was the first day. You got 5 questions in the morning, math problems, and then you got 5 in the afternoon. Okay, and it took you all day to do them. Then the next day you came in, and I want to say it was 50 problems, and they were all essay types. Don't write yes or no. Okay, you write yes or no, you may get a partial credit for it. Very humbling test. I would say that the skin of my teeth type of thing, right? When I got that result, I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember vividly Don Tanner, because I was so frustrated because I'm in there taking the test, and you got three experienced inspectors sitting over there monitoring the exam. And Don would come in and they're just yapping back and forth. And I'm this young guy with zero concentration. And I'm like, guys, can you please? Oh my gosh, I thought Don Tender was going to hit me with a chair. And when we got done, we walked out and I was so frustrated. And he says, you thought it was going to be easy, didn't you, kid? You know, and he's like, you're not as smart as you thought you were. And it's like, you're right. You know, and that was my first humbling, smacked me down. So that was how those tests were back then. But, as the years went by, okay, I would be the one that would be monitoring that test. They would bring me into town. I would sit there and I would watch these guys just tearing their hair out. They were just so, and I was like, I was there. I know what they're going through. Then I left West Tennessee and came back to Nashville, became a team leader, and I was sent to, I got my A endorsement, B endorsement. Those are a shop inspector where they're manufacturing boilers. And then got a B endorsement, shop inspector supervisor. And then they actually sent me to N school, nuclear inspector school. Didn't need it. It was great. Okay. All of those continually were very hard courses. But I started hearing these rumblings of we can't find candidates because when I left the Navy, they were starting to get away from conventional boilers, propulsion for the ships. They were going to, you had nuclear, which most people know that nuclear it's really a fancy boiler. Still producing steam and propulsion and everything like that. But they were going to gas turbines and they were getting rid of the conventional. So to the point where after I left the Navy in 1990, way before you were born, smart Alec, they actually took the boiler technician rating and made all boiler technicians choose to go to a different engineering rate, or I think other militaries, they like calling it the MOSs, I believe is the terminology. We just called it rating. And so they became machinist mates. Well, I was a machinist mate. And you say, well, how does that have to do with the boiler? Well, the machinist mate, we were all in the same work environment. We lived in the same berthing compartments. I was cross rate qualified on the BT side, top watch qualified on the MM side, but didn't stand to watch, right? But when they decided to get rid of the conventional boilers, they didn't need BTs anymore. So they made them, a lot of them became machinist mates. I know one that I served with that he retired a couple years ago, and it showed his retirement photo and all his glory with this. He was can't remember if he retired as a master or a senior chief, but he looked great, and he's all decked out. But then you look on his insignia and you got the screw, the propeller. The propeller was the insignia for machinist mate, whereas Nero's boiler, I believe it's Nero's boiler, is the symbol for a boiler technician. And so I gave him so much crap because he was always one of the BTs are better than machinist mates. But then he had to retire as a machinist mate because there was no other, it's like, the running joke. It's the difference between a BT's just a machinist mates with his brains bashed in, kind of some smart aleck response like that. But we were all brothers and we all dealt with steam. And so we started losing those guys. They started retiring out. Military is the big source of future inspectors. And so things had to change. And some of that was, do we really need the commission exam to be as engineering focused as it is? And a lot of these guys, especially going to work for the state, we used to make the joke. It's like, man, why are we taking this test to go around and kick water heaters? I mean, that's kind of the thought. It's like, do we really need to know a compensation problem to see if a water heater is leaking or not, or if a control is not working properly? And so it started getting away from that. It's gone even farther. A lot of people say they dummied down the test. They did initially. They did initially, and that drove Bob Schuler crazy, by the way. I think that was one of the reasons he wanted to retire. But then they got smart and they then separated a commission inspector and required them to get a R endorsement to be able to do any type of repair inspections. So your commission inspector was an in-service inspections, really. And so they were able to do the in-service to make sure that the boiler pressure vessel is operating safely, no adverse conditions to it, so on and so forth. So that was your entry level inspector. Then if they were able to do repair inspections, because now you're starting to get into the code, now you're going to have to start verifying that the repair company is performing the repairs or alterations to the code. That took you to a next level. And then you still had your levels of your A endorsement for a shop inspector for manufacturing, B endorsement for supervisor. And they have a few more that I really haven't kept up with over the years because that's not the genre that I live in per se. But I do know they've gotten better about it because there was a time there where it was like, hey, these are pretty simple questions. And are we going to let this person, we're not really covering repair inspections. They're going to be the one that's going to be able to sign off on this. And so they changed that. And so a person can go, and as I was telling you about Kimberly, the director of the National Board's training department, they've really developed some good courses to prepare. It's kind of like, I want to call it a boot camp, if you would, but I guess you could compare it to, somebody going to SEAL training. It used to be they would ship you off to buds, right? During my time. Now you can come in a fresh 18-year-old. They'll ship you up to Great Lakes, Illinois, and have you go through a pre-buds. It's kind of like that. They send you up and send you for a few weeks and take you through what it's going to take to take the commission exam. And at the end of the commission course, pre-commission course, then you can sit for the commission exam and get your commission. And I think that that's a very good way to do it because when I was chief inspector, we would hire newer inspectors and I would be their teacher. I guess it should I guess it should have kind of gave me a thought of, man, I'm not bad at this because that's what we do a lot now is training. And we get the guys in there and pull out the books and find old questions, make up new questions, and sit them in a classroom environment and teach them. Well, that's what the national board is doing now. And it's great because the jurisdictions are able to send their people up to the national board and be able to be prepared. And once they get their commission, they're able to come back. State of Tennessee has done a great job with an apprenticeship program where they bring in people and you get old guys like me to sit there and go, oh, man, that guy don't know anything about a boiler. Well, if you put them in an apprenticeship program and you put them with qualified people and you send them to classes, I allow for jurisdictions to send their people to any of my classes free of charge. Why? Because jurisdictions are scrapped for training budgets. And if I can help them in any way, they call me up and we'll hold back a few seats every time and say, hey, if a jurisdiction wants to send somebody, give me a call. If you work for the Commonwealth of Kentucky or the state of Georgia, and you want to send somebody up to a basic boiler operator class or a water treatment and testing class or something like that, well, come on. I think it helps. And that's where the national board has done a great job with that, is that they want to bring people in. They do not want to give commissions to people that don't know what they're doing because, like you said, that people say, well, somebody comes in and inspects your boiler and then something happens to it, right? Well, we all know that that boiler was in a safe condition or perceived to be in a safe condition the minute that inspector was there. We don't know what happens after that. Now, you take that inspector and that inspector is deposed or put on the stand, and that inspector really doesn't know the difference between a fire tube or a water tube boiler. Now, what does that do? Or it goes the same thing with the technician, Eric. Somebody that that you've trained, or somebody that's one of your clients or you, and they get you up there and they start talking about a control or something like that, and you can't answer that question, then they're going to fall on the side of, well, he was negligent. Well, same thing with the inspector. The inspector is negligent. So national board doesn't want to put somebody out there that doesn't understand their basics. And national board did a really good thing about requiring annual training. Now, when I was chief inspector, they would come in and they would say, okay, now you got to show all this inspector before we issue them a new commission card this year. We got to show that they've been receiving continual education. And so we always did that. And that's why it's great if we can, provide a free seat or something to a state whenever they have new people. We do it all the time in Nashville. Georgia hasn't really taken me up on it because we do them in Georgia, the classes in Georgia too. But hopefully one of those chiefs will hear this and say, you know what, let me reach out to Marty and get one of these seats before they fill up.
So at the national board level, a person working for a local jurisdiction like a state and somebody working for a insurance company, they're going to have the same level of training if they just get the first commission. Like there's going to be no difference between a commission for an insurance person versus a commission for a state, right?
Yeah, I can't say yes to that, Eric. And the reason why I say their commission level is the same. Okay, no different than an owner user. So you have, and I failed to mention that too, is another entity that is authorized, or those entities that are certified and authorized by the national board to be an owner user. Great example would be Eastman Chemical Company. Okay, Eastman Chemical Company used to be Kodak Eastman out of East Tennessee, and chemical industry, obviously thousands of pressure vessels and a great number of boilers. And so they have their own commission as well. Okay. Well, it's an owner user commission. They cannot go do inspections for somebody outside of their company. So now when you say the question, they have a commission, they've got a commission, it's the same commission. The training to get there, insurance companies tend to do a little bit more. They will have internal departments. Some of them have actually approached me about being their resource. I don't have a problem with that, to put something together for them, or to be the actual instructor itself, or to supplement what they already have. Because they know, especially if it's ones that have the insurance or part of the underwriting on that, they know that it's all about money for them, right? It's either going to be money or liability, and they're going to make sure their people are very well trained. Not saying the state people aren't. It's just I tend to see a little bit more emphasis on the um, inspection side of it.
Okay, yeah. So the level of training is different, but the actual, like, when somebody says, I'm a national board commission inspector, just like the first level of it, that is the same test, whether you work for a jurisdiction or an insurance company or a private inspection company. There's no like, hey, if you're going to be in insurance, this is this. Like, essentially, the national board commission inspector, the first level of it, not the other endorsements, everybody takes the same test.
Yes.
For a boiler owner or an operator, they have an insurance company come out for their inspector. How do they determine? Is it typically going to be their insurance company? How do you determine whether it's going to be the state coming out or your insurance company coming out?
Yeah, great question. So jurisdictions, I'm going to step out on a limb here. and say jurisdictions all work the same. In this case, somebody will probably pop back and say, no, we don't do that here in this state. But if they have insurance representation, okay, inspection representation, they're going to notify the jurisdiction that, hey, we're Hartford Steam Boiler. We have the in-service inspection responsibility for ABC Company. If they don't notify the jurisdiction, it automatically goes on the roll for the state inspector or the municipal inspector to do those inspections. One of the biggest issues that we had, and this really kind of flew in the face of where I was a little naive early on, was I want to say it was 31% delinquent rate in the state of Tennessee when I took over as chief. And yeah, that kind of put a black eye on Don Tanner because he was the chief inspector before me, but it really was a issue with notification. It was a system problem that we had. And so one of the things that I took on as, I wouldn't call me a senior deputy, but I was given a lot more responsibility, was I worked with in-house IT department to create the first fully integrated electronic entry program for boiler inspections in North America. And what I mean by fully integrated, it meant that any insurance company could use it. The system, they could use their own system, develop their own fixed line text file, send that information in. We were able to run it through our system and got rid of the paper. Okay. And so it wasn't just the insurance companies can do it, and it wasn't just the state could do it. It's everybody could do it. Well, then, of course, now the national board has their own system in place, which is pretty amazing. There was some third parties out there that had them for years that are still in operation, but we were kind of one of the first ones to do it. And the reason why we were was we noticed that there was a backlog or a bottleneck, if you would, of paper reports coming in and being manually processed by the office staff. And those that did not generate revenue were pushed off to the side. And so what was happening was there were a lot of boilers and pressure vessels that weren't getting inspected or were getting inspected and the documentation wasn't being put in, or that were put out of service, but there was no notification. And so what we created was an add drop program. And so what that meant was the insurance provider every month would send a document. And if on their system they removed that jurisdiction number, because just like a national board number on the boiler or pressure vessel, they received a jurisdiction, a Tennessee number, registration number. And in that file, if they omitted that number from their electronic file, it would then fall back to state responsibility until somebody added it to their file. And so every once in a while, you would get like a month or two that it would be a little, it'd bounce back or forth, or it would go to the state. But most of the time, it was fine unless there was an incident that occurred. It was fine because the new insurance company would pick it back up. So that was a way for us to get from, 31% delinquent rate to below 2% in probably about a year. That and knowing who's responsible for inspecting this boiler. So what if it wasn't an insurance company telling us they were responsible, and it sat there delinquent, and somebody's saying, hey, insurance company number one, you've got this vessel that's delinquent, and they come back and say, well, it's not ours anyway. So it'd sit there. Well, then it goes to the state and the state picks it up. Well, then what we found was, okay, got all the insurance companies in there together. And I sat there and I showed them, I said, look, guys, we're doing a lot of your work for you. And if we find that you're not telling us that you dropped insurance on this and we find it delinquent and it's over 90 days delinquent, we're going to go out and do the inspection. Then we're going to send you an inspection bill. And that inspection bill is not going to be small. It's going to be a special inspection fee of $250. They all like sat back in their seats and they started doing the math. And it was like, well, we better get on top of this. And it wasn't, being harsh. It was saying, look, you guys are writing insurance for your client and you're not providing the services that you're writing insurance for. So they got on board with it. Then they started notifying and they started letting us know that, hey, we don't have insurance on this anymore. And we were like, fine, no problem. We'll take it until somebody else picks it up. So that's how the owner or user knows who's going to come out there is, do they have in their insurance, do they have a boiler machinery policy built into that? If they have a boiler machinery policy built into that in states like the state of Tennessee, that insurance company has to provide the boiler machinery insurance or services for that policy. So it's their responsibility to pick up that insurance. And that's why when they go and somebody goes and visits the plant to do an assessment, they say, okay, we've got these pieces of equipment here. They have boilers, they have pressure vessels. Okay, we've got to add that to the list. And so that's where that comes about. And there were situations I can remember where there were owner users of boilers that would prefer to have me come do their inspection. And so they'd pay a little bit extra and they were fine with that.
I would want you inspecting my boiler.
Well, thank you very much. See that you're just trying to make up for the old man joke earlier. But yeah, it really is kind of one of those things that it's all about the communication. And it's all about understanding the owner user, not an owner user like an owner user inspection agency, but the owner or user has to recognize that they are ultimately responsible. They say, yeah, but we didn't know. And it's a phrase that comes across so crass. It's ignorance is no excuse of the law. And that it comes across just so harsh, but it's true. It's, not understanding what the speed limit is and going too fast and, you get pulled over. You should know. That's kind of one of those things. You should be paying attention to the signs or what have you. It's kind of one of those things. And so anybody that you speak to, Eric, just let them know it's a responsibility of the boiler operator to keep a safe and efficiently operating boiler. It's the responsibility of the owner or the user to ensure that it's all being done. And that's really what it comes down to when we talk about who's responsible for the inspection. Number one, it's the owner or user.
I get a letter in the mail that says, hey, your high pressure steam boiler is due for an internal inspection. And I schedule the internal inspection. The state is going to come out. What do I have to do in order to pass or get ready for that internal inspection?
Great question. Great question. Number one is it all depends on your knowledge. Then secondly, it all depends on the type of boiler you have. A smart owner and user will err on the side of getting somebody else in there to help me with it if they don't do it on a regular basis. What do they need to do? Well, here's the thing. A lot of places aren't going to send a lot of jurisdictions, and that may have changed over the past couple decades, but a lot of jurisdictions don't send a letter necessarily. What they'll do is they leave it up to the responsibility of the inspector to reach out, or at least that's what we used to do. We would call up, introduce ourselves. We'd say, we need you to do an internal inspection. I'm going to be in your area a week out. You have to give a set amount of time, usually it's 7 days, that I'm going to be in your area and I'm going to come by. Now, it matters how your experience with that particular company is. You're going to try to help them as much as you can. It's like a dry cleaner. I'm trying to think of it used to be the busiest day, and you may know this if you've worked with any Eric. I think it's usually Monday mornings. I don't know why, but Wednesday sticks in my mind too. But let's go with Monday morning. That's the busiest time. Is that you don't want to show up at 11 o'clock in the morning at a dry cleaner that's servicing all the stuff that was turned in over the weekend and on Friday, what have you, right? So you work with them. and you say, "Hey, I may be there on Monday, but I'm going to get there at 7 o'clock in the morning." Now, as an inspector, I maybe had to drive 100 miles to get there. So I'm up super early. Okay. You get there, maybe it's not a Clayton, maybe it's a Hurst boiler, maybe it's a Fulton vertical tubeless unit. Geez, what does it take to make steam? You've got steam coming out of the thing within 15 minutes or less. All right. So it's not going to take you long to have that boiler up and going. Now, what do you need to do as the owner user to prepare for me to walk in? Well, in the industry, a lot of times, Eric, and you've probably heard this, is called the annual inspection. You'll hear people call it the annual inspection. And the misunderstanding of that term makes you think, well, that boiler's only inspected once a year. The annual part of that usually has to do with the certificate being issued. It's an annual certificate. So to get that certificate, it's smart for the jurisdiction to require an internal inspection before they will issue a certificate that's good for 1 year. The reason being is if you issued it on an external inspection while the boiler is operating, then you call up said dry cleaner and say, "Hey, look, we need to shut down your boiler. Yes, we know you've got 6 months left on your certificate. And what's that owner going to do? I can't do it that day. Yeah, can we do it this day? Hey, I still got 6 months. I'm good." So the jurisdiction says, no, no, no. If you want to you want an operating certificate, you're going to open this boiler. So let's say you get that notification, and let's say it's a simple boiler like a Fulton vertical tubeless. For those not familiar, if you can imagine, the burner comes into the side, comes into the top, matters which type you got. Flame goes into the furnace chamber, you have combustion. You got baffling inside of it that causes the flue gases to find its path of least resistance, which is the nice hole on the side of the boiler. It's got the stack connected to it. What those flue gases are going to do is they're going to pass through that boiler that's directed and heat the boiler up. So really the only thing that you're looking at on these type of units is you can pull the burner out if you really think it's necessary in that case. But really what we're taking out is we're taking the handholds off, the inspection handholds. And these handholds on these type of units, maybe at the bottom. Why is it important to have them on the bottom? Well, that's where you're going to clean them out as well. Eric, you're smiling because you've been there, brother. You know what I'm talking about. Is you remove these handhold plates and you look in and you see if you've got corrosion. You see these boilers have a water line. So you're going to have one that's in the proximity of the water line. You can get some oxygen corrosion and pitting occurring in that area. But that's not the only thing you're going to take off. You're going to also take your low water cutoffs off. It matters what you got. Do you have a probe? Let's remove that. Let's look at that probe. If we have a float chamber for like a McDonnell Miller or McDonnell and Miller, but McDonnell Miller and M&M, you're going to remove that. You maybe from time to time you need to remove the burner. Okay. Does it have to be every year? Nah, not necessarily. But if we're talking about bigger units like a Cleaver Brooks fire tube boiler, we remove the integral burner out of that. If we see signs that you could have a cracked diffuser, all right, yeah, we want to take that out. We see issues with the refractory, we want to take that out. But on a boiler like that Cleaver Brooks, you're opening doors, both ends of it. You want to be able to see the tube sheets. You want to remove all the handholds, and if it has a manway, to remove the manway off the top of the boiler, along with detaching things like your low water controls. These are all things in the Navy, we call it taking it down to parade rest or taking it down in cold iron when the boiler's off. Okay. And it's critically important not to skip any of these steps during this inspection. don't let an inspector come in there when you get on the phone with them and says, "Hey, what do you need me? What do you need me to do, Mister Inspector? Just remove one handhole over here, and don't worry about the front door. Let's remove the back. Just open up the back door. We'll get the rest of that next time." Negatory. No, sir. He's not doing you any favors, or she's not doing you any favors, because there's a lot of females out there and they are excellent inspectors. Let me just tell you that. I've had a number of them go through my class and they're fabulous. They're not doing you a favor, Eric, by saying, "Oh, you don't need to remove those handholds on the bottom of the boiler." What they're doing is they don't want to get their lazy butts down underneath it. They don't want to get dirty. They don't want to, crawl under the boiler. Any inspector want to give me a call and dispute that with me, I'll be more than happy to have that conversation with you. I've been around, I've done that, and I've got the t-shirt. Okay. Remove those handholds, replace all those gaskets. You don't reuse gaskets on the fire side or the water side. You make sure those tubes are clean inside and out. Just the issue, this is where I start talking about it's not just safe operating. Safety is number one, but it's also an efficiently operating boiler, a safe and efficiently operating boiler. Efficiency always number two in that order. Okay. But we want to make sure that our client, when we're doing this inspection, understands that they may have issues going on that are costing them money or could potentially, over the course of time, disable that boiler for a time or two and keep them down. And you're trying to do them a favor by not opening up a handhole. You're not doing them any favors. If they want to gripe and complain about it, I can show you, what it says in the NBIC guidelines for it if you'd like. And that's really what I think about that. What they should do is make sure if they don't understand what that is, bring somebody in who does. You can use it as on the job training if you have the staff. But then when we start buttoning this boiler back up after the inspection is done, there's a lot to that. And I see a lot of issues. I've seen issues from service companies, Eric, that are supposed to be the quote unquote experts that aren't connecting certain things or putting bolts on a certain way. You got to tune that boiler. You open that boiler up, it doesn't matter what size that boiler is. If it's a combustion boiler, it's using fuel, that boiler needs to be tuned once it's put back together. That's critically important to make sure that boiler's tuned. Not just anybody can do that. It takes a lot of skill and experience. If not, next thing you know, you're replacing that boiler because you're going to have a furnace explosion. It may or may not rupture that vessel, but it's going to do some damage to it. Okay, I used to call it taking a square and turning it into a circle. When you'd see furnace explosions of people not understanding the proper way to turn a huge water tube boiler, it's got this casing around the boiler that's not really built for pressure. Okay, it's some thick metal, but it's not really built for the pressure that you have. And next thing you have a furnace explosion, and this cube turns into a sphere. Because it's blown everything out. Well, guess what? You're not firing that boiler for a long time. So make sure you have qualified people doing it, or get your people qualified. Bring somebody in, somebody like you, Eric, somebody like me, somebody like another service company, and bring them in and have them go through the process of it, of how to properly tear that boiler down. If they want to learn how to set combustion, by all means, spend the money, send them to schools that teach. We don't do that. I stay away from that. But there are some service companies out there that may do it, but maybe some schools out there that also do it to show setting combustion. I would say find you a good service company. It'd be more efficient for you to find a service company that is really good at it and just pay them to do it. And I I tell people all the time, they say, well, how often should you do it? I'm a little bit more conservative. I say every 3 months, but I go into it at least seasonally. As your seasons change, you should perform combustion. And I sound like somebody that's, oh, well, you're just marketing to the service companies and trying. No, I'm not. I don't have a dog in that hunt. I'm giving you consulting advice, and the consulting advice is seasonally checking that combustion, making sure your boiler is operating as safely and efficiently as possible, and it's going to pay for himself.
So the inspector is looking at the overall condition of the boiler, not just the condition of the pressure vessel.
That's right. That's right. I used to get very frustrated, Eric, when I would hear inspectors say things like, "We're not control inspectors," and I would say, "Well, you're not just a pressure boundary inspector either." And when you look at things like the code, okay, so you ask the question, so what codes you work in? Oh, okay. I work in ASME, section 1, section 4, section 8. For those that aren't familiar, that's, power boilers, heating boilers, and unfired pressure vessels, right? Section 8 Div 1. Okay, well, nothing in there says anything about this or that, what this control or this, that, or whatever. And I'm like, okay, what else do you reference in the rules and regulations of the state? Okay, well, you got CSD1, controls and safety devices 1. Okay, what does that cover? Control, safety devices. So if you are a in-service inspector that is also responsible to a reference code like CSD1 or NFPA 85 for any boiler over 12.5 million BTUs of fuel input, then you're an inspector for that as well. You're not just a pressure boundary inspector. You need to learn the controls and safety devices, because when you go in to do your inspection, you're not just looking to see if this thing is leaking. You're not just looking to see if you see an overheated spot on the side of the refractory. You should be going in there and making sure those controls and safety devices are working. That includes, water level. Most inspectors, they understand, hey, we got a steam boiler. Does the low water cutoff work? Yes. Okay, great. What about the auxiliary low water cutoff? What about the flame scanner? What about the high gas pressure switch? What about the low gas pressure switch? What about the combustion air proving switch? What about all these things that you have? Are they alarming? Are they giving indication that they're working properly or not? I think I shocked you maybe the last time we spoke when you've seen the Dana Corporation boiler explosion years ago, and you just realized that I was the chief inspector that wrote that.
That's still my favorite report, probably because it's one of the best reports out there, but it is so nicely done.
Well, thanks, brother. Well, here's the thing with that. And people say, and I say, when I sit in code meetings and I'll ask questions and I'll say stuff, they say, wow, you really speak up. And I said, dude, a lot of this stuff's out of ignorance. I mean, I'm honest, I'm a sponge. I want to learn all the time. And a lot of what took me down that road is, let's realize that was in 2007. So I was still in my 30s. And so I'm still learning. I had my teeth kicked in for a few years as chief inspector, so I'm still learning. And I came across that one and said, oh my gosh, this is the most obvious example of how I can crap the bed in operating a boiler. And it was just like, it just flowed, right? To say, oh my gosh, let's not do this. I need to make sure that this report is so thoroughly documented. And I learned so much just writing that report because it was so blatantly irresponsible from management all the way down. And so, kind of going on that line, when you look at that, you understand that the inspectors that were involved in that we're just as culpable as the operators and as the management because they did not document that they did a thorough job of your quote unquote external inspection. We call it the operation inspection. Well, what's the purpose of the operation inspection but to make sure that while it's operating, those devices that will secure that boiler are working properly? Well, if you don't do an external inspection, you only do an internal inspection, you're missing half of it. And then when you do that internal inspection, you do not do a complete internal inspection. You don't remove low water cutoffs. You don't remove probes. You don't open all the manways, handholds, anything like that. You're doing a disservice. So by that inspectors over the course of time, and I listed in that report, just, you know, they were delinquent. The operators had no idea what they were doing. They didn't know how to test those. So anytime BTG does a custom class, the custom class is going to be on your equipment. It's not like BBO classes are great. We identify equipment, but with the custom classes, we go into that particular location and we go through their equipment on their controls and their safety devices, and you show them the proper processes and procedures. And it's so funny, Eric, how many times we'll have a class and walk through and we start doing these tests during the demo time when and the control's not working. And you go, well, that's great. I didn't set that up. It just happened to happen. And you say, okay, well, great. So now what do you need to do? And so now you have a real world situation of how you can solve that problem. And had that happened a number of times, and it's very eye opening for everybody involved. So yeah, so doing those inspections and making sure you understand the operation of the controls and safety devices, and it's not just during that inspection, because let's remember, a lot of jurisdictions, the low pressure boilers, steam or hot water are only inspected once every 2 years. Unfired pressure vessels, same thing, once every 2 years in a lot of cases, and some not at all. So just because a jurisdiction doesn't require for those pressure vessels being fired or unfired to be regulated doesn't mean you should not inspect them. Doesn't mean you as an owner or a user should not take responsibility and bring in companies, because not only is it your livelihood to keep your operation going, but if something happens, now it's on you because somebody got killed. Do you want to be that person? You want to be that person that says, I had the authority to get a company in here every year or every 6 months or every quarter to look at our equipment. I didn't do it because I wanted to save a little bit of money. And then something happened, or I didn't train my people properly and they flipped the switch the wrong direction. And now they're not going home to their family. I don't want to be that person. So,
Yes, that's kind of what happened with less details at the Loy Lang Box Company in
mhm,
St. Louis. Even though it was required, there was a lapse in inspection and
mhm,
the pressure vessel bottom blew out. But going back, I got a couple thoughts. So I was always and have been unclear about what is the role of an inspector, because I had an inspector one time, had a fire tube boiler and had the refractory kind of looked like a rock slide into the Morrison tube on the rear door. And he said that I was like, it was still partially there, but I was very concerned. It really needed a new rear door, but the customer was said, "Oh no, close it up." And I was like, "Hey, can you say anything with this?" And he was like, "Well, I'll recommend that they get it looked at, but that's not my jurisdiction to tell them that the refractory," because I was concerned that the rear door was going to start turning red. That was how much refractory was missing. And I was like, well, if this rear door metal starts turning red, Like, that's obviously a safety issue. So, but he was like, "Oh, that's not my jurisdiction. I'm here to just look at the pressure vessel."
Yeah, no, I hate the fact that they take that approach. And I don't want to speak for Ohio. I mean, obviously the national award is in Ohio, so it's in Columbus. I don't want to speak for Ohio and say, what their rules say. It's been probably 7 years since I've looked at their rules and regulations, and nothing stood out to me that would say it's only the pressure boundary. But I think that inspector is completely wrong. Um, the reason why I say that is what's to say in a hypothetical here, if that particular inspector is saying refractory is not his jurisdiction, what about the donut ring going around the burner? If it were to crumble, collapse, fall, impinge upon the flame, that causes an overheated condition that can cause a bulge in the Morrison tube that then can cause a leak you see where I'm going with that? That then can cause disruption of the flow of the fuel, that they could lead to a fuel air ratio disruption that can cause a furnace explosion and I can keep going on and on and on. Now, what's going to happen when they go back and they say, well, the inspector saw that there was a refractory that had fallen off that impinged, but he said it wasn't his jurisdiction. He could only recommend. But that furnace explosion caused a rear door to blow off that just happened to be in line with the boiler operator's workstation that then smashed them up against a cinder block wall. Oh, well, that's just not my jurisdiction, so I don't have to worry about that. That's baloney. That that is an inspector not wanting to step up. And again, let me ask this question. You'll be going out on a limb here. Was that inspector you spoke to, was it a jurisdiction or an insurance inspector?
Insurance.
All I need to say right there, or all you need to say right there. That is one of the bad raps that you get because there are so many excellent insurance inspectors out there, tremendous insurance inspectors that have a lot of care about the code. Some of them have to be kind of like rein back a little bit and say, okay, let's not overstep that line of what the code allows you to do. Okay. But I love your enthusiasm. But then there are some that are like, well, I don't want to make them mad. Because if I make them mad, and this is a big account, what are they going to do? They're going to go find somebody else. Okay. That's not going to make them do it. And that's the concern that I always had about that is the jurisdictional inspectors sometimes could go overboard a little bit and lean on the side of the bad versus the good, or the black versus the white. Hey, we're going to be understanding and give you an opportunity to correct this issue. It's harmful to the boiler. It can extend. I'm going to give you, okay, so let's schedule a shutdown. We got a little leaking tube down here. It's nothing dramatic, but let's shut down in 2 weeks. Let's get this thing repaired and let's open it back up. That's acceptable. Some that say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to worry about it. You know, let's just plug these 3 fire tubes down here around the Morrison tube and let's keep trucking along because it's allowed. But that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I'm concerned. I'm concerned when I hear somebody say it's not their jurisdiction. Their jurisdiction is the boiler. It's not just the pressure boundary. It's the whole boiler.
Going back to your female inspector comment, I've only met one. She worked for an insurance company. And next story for those listening, I used to work for a service company, and I would do a lot of these annual inspections as far as opening up the boiler and then have the inspector of the state come in and inspect it. So I would watch them, and a lot of them would be 15-ish minutes per boiler. And then this lady got hired. She came in, and it was an hour and a half. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, what are you seeing
Why
here?
is she
And
making us
she was
stay
just
here so
very,
long?
very thorough. And one of the jobs she found
Mhm.
improperly replaced stay rods on a fire tube boiler and I don't know how they did it, but they had replaced the stay rods, and I'm not a stay rod expert, but it needs to go all the way through the tube sheet and then get welded. Well, they had cut them off on the inside of the tube sheet and replaced the stay rods and made the weld on the
Yeah.
backside of the tube sheet. So the weld,
Little fillet weld.
the weld and the rod that you saw coming through the tube sheet was just a little plug from the old stay rod. And she only knew that because she like spent the time to like stick her head in the manway and like inspected every single stay rod and was like, hey,
Yeah.
those do not look like factory.
Good for
And then
her.
looked up all the documentation and said, hey, you guys don't have any stay rod documentation that they were replaced. And then like kept looking into it, looked into it, and unauthorized company had gone in and replaced all the stay rods on the boiler. And if you don't know, stay rods are basically to hold the tube sheet together. And if you don't have those stay rods, the tube sheet is going to want to bend or blow out essentially in the middle
Mhm.
and kind of curve on a fire tube boiler. On a very simple explanation, but yeah, it's kind of stuff like that if you just go into every inspection assuming that everything is correct and you're just there to check the boxes, you're not going to find something like that.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah, you see a lot of that, and that's very thorough of her. That's pretty darn impressive. A lot of the inspectors don't want to go through the issue of confined space. Oh, I'm just going to stick my head in there and look around. Well, you just broke the barrier. Okay, so you just broke the barrier, so you technically just entered confined space, and so they just half-heartedly just flash the light around and everything else. So that's pretty impressive that she picked up on that. And there are a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of good inspectors out there. It just seems like when I meet these female inspectors, they're I don't know what it is. I mean, it could be just the meticulous side of it. It could have something to do with the hard track that they've had in an industry that's dominated by males, that they're like, I'm not half stepping on this. I'm taking a lot of pride in this, and I love that. And I'm going to tell you, my clients probably don't want to hear it, but I'll go to some client location, and there will be some female technicians in there that work for them that are just rock stars. And I'm like, if you ever decide that you want to do something different, you let me know and I'll put you on a path, because the industry need very good inspectors, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female. You need good inspectors. And when I see these people, I say all the time, and fortunately, there's a lot of inspectors out there that are inspectors now or that have since retired that I met during my time, that I talked to, and maybe they were somebody at a plant or something like that, and they sat down and said, "What's it like being an inspector?" And I would sit there and I would help them on the side, before they had the training that they had, and there's quite a few of them right now that I could name off that are still or recently retired inspectors that left what they're doing just because I saw something in them, and I encouraged them, and they took the route and they became inspectors just because I knew that for the betterment of the industry. And it's, I'm not trying to rob people to come work for me. That's not what I'm doing with my clients. I'm just seeing, I'd like to see people better themselves with more experience and opportunity.
So if somebody is listening to this and says, hey, this inspector thing sounds interesting, how do they go about inquiring about being an inspector, either with an insurance company or a local jurisdiction?
Yeah, first things first is if you walk into an interview with an insurance company or a jurisdiction, already have passed the commission exam, unless you just completely blew the interview, okay, and walked in there in a pair of Tomo Bahama, shirt and short, they're probably going to hire you. So I would say if you have a position that you're at right now that you can on the side invest in yourself to get the National Board Commission exam behind you, do that first. Second, go to the nationalboard.org website and look up the jurisdictional chief, and then also the list of authorized inspection agencies, and reach out to them if they're in your area, and reach out to that chief inspector. That information should be there. When you're thinking about salaries have changed dramatically, but historically they're relatively the same. Insurance companies tend to pay a lot more than a jurisdictional company. Obviously, the insurance companies have a lot more pressure on them for a production result. It's a for profit organization, whereas a jurisdiction is not. However, you're still required to serve your territory. So you got to think about that. Are you willing to travel a lot more windshield time to go to different locations? If you're willing to do that, probably insurance is good for you. If you want to be home every night, jurisdiction is good for you. If you have a retirement, that was the biggest thing. And that's why I think salaries are so low for so long, is that you would get somebody that was ex-military and retired. So they're already getting a pension from the military. Some people that I know now that one of my dearest friends retired from the military. Is a Vietnam veteran, served in the Navy. He retired, went to work for a company, worked there 20 years, retired from there, and then became a boiler inspector. And again, now he's obviously since retired from all of it, but he was able to supplement the lower salary working for the state because he had a pension somewhere else. So I would say if you've got somebody that has years in service working in the industry and they say, I want something that's meaningful but less stressful, but they have a pension somewhere else, becoming a boiler inspector is great, because it allows you that freedom to continue to work, continue to get benefits, and have a meaningful job and bring your experiences from other jobs to it. I mean, that's a lot more attractive to an employer.
The other part of an inspection is, and probably the most important part of a pressure vessel, other than its construction, is the safety relief valves. What is an inspector looking for on the safety relief valves as far as condition-wise, and how often should they be tested? If it is a steam one, maybe high-pressure steam and or hot water for a relief valve. Technically, a safety valve is for vapor service, a relief valve, liquid, but I see very conflicting information and of like, hey, they need to be tested every 6 months. They need to be changed every year. They need to be rebuilt. What does the National Board say about that, and what is inspectors are typically looking for?
That's a really a great question, because what you'll see a lot of is misunderstanding, just like you said, and you'll see that sometimes in things like the National Board Inspection Code, of understanding the difference between a safety valve and a relief valve, and you'll hear the term safety relief valve. And I teach people that this the term safety relief valve is a catch-all, because it determines what its operation is, determines if it's a safety valve or relief valve. You hit the nail on the head when you said steam or vapor service, or gas or vapor service, to be technical, because if we have uh, an air storage tank, Okay, it has a safety valve on it. The term that most people want to use is pop valve, right? And that's easy to say or to call it that because a pop valve is the action of that particular device. It's going to pop rapidly opening action. It's going to pop open, makes a loud noise, and it goes from completely closed to completely opened. All right. A relief valve used for liquid service. Okay. So a lot of people, when I say I use the word fluid, most of them think wet, most of them think water, most of them think liquid or whatever. But a fluid is anything that takes the shape of its container. And, I often, when I teach people, I'll hold up like I'm doing right now, hold up a water bottle that's half empty. All right. Was it half empty or half full? Matters how positive you are. And say, well, what shape? What's in there? Well, it's fluid. Well, it's not just the water; it's also the air, the gas on top, and both of them are taking the shape of the container it's in. And so their mind kind of blows a little bit, and then I bring them back down to the lesson plan, which is when it's a liquid service. Okay, it's going to have a gradual opening in relationship to the pressure on the seat or the disc of that valve. So it's going to gradually open. And I give the mental image of if I were to take this relief valve and I were to put it on a test stand and I were to inject water into the bottom of it at a pressure, as that pressure starts to increase to the lifting point of that valve, you would see water start to trickle initially out of the outlet of that valve. The more pressure I put to it, the more that disc is going to lift and the more water is going to come out to the point where it's fully open and you get a gusher of water coming out. That's how they operate. Now, to ask the question, how often they should be tested, okay, you really could go back to the national board recommendations. Okay. And so the national board recommendations have gotten very precise over the years. It used to be, it would say that you used to, for steam boilers, for instance, you used to manually lift, not a pop test. Okay, that's different, but a manual test using the test lever. Okay, or the try lever is that you would want to do it once every 3 months, once a quarter. Well, that's no longer the case. So when you start looking at boilers that operate up to 400 psi, what the recommendation is a manual test of once every 6 months. That's a good test point. When you start getting over 400 psi, that's when it gets a little worrisome about doing testing, manual testing, and for various reasons, obviously, mostly because of the actual pressure, the dangers of the pressure being released, also the temperatures that are associated being released. But really, the physical part of it is when you lift those valves, the potential for damage to the seat and disc of that device increases as the pressure increases. And it can develop with just the velocity of the steam going past that seat can actually cut into that seat and into that disc and causes damage to it. So when you look at what should be done in the way of testing, you're going to look at the code that's going to point you to a steam valve should be replaced, overhauled, or tested annually. Okay. And you could say, well, what is that? What do you mean? You just said you shouldn't test it. Well, this is what the code is going to allow you to do. It's that if we're going to take it off, okay, we can then take that to a valve repair company or a valve manufacturer to have that valve overhauled. Okay. They're going to take apart that valve. They're going to replace certain components that may or may not need to be replaced. They then are going to put that valve back together, and then they're going to put it on a test table and make sure that it lifts at the appropriate pressure, and it also relieves the appropriate capacity. I mean, I can go into detail about what capacity is, but I mean, it may take a minute. But mainly when we think about that, we want to make sure that we're doing one of those three things. The other is obviously we can go out and buy a new one, but that could get pretty darn expensive. Some of the smaller units, yeah, you're talking, $400, $500, $600 to replace, or you can spend tens of thousands of dollars on safety valves. I had a situation, I think I may or may not have told you about this in the past, where I had a client that did pop tests. This is where we come to either overhaul, replace, or test. And what we did for every year, because these valves, replacing these valves on the top of this boiler, I want to say it was somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000. Okay. And so every year, what would happen is we do a pop test. So what does that entail? That entails actually closing down the steam outlet, putting that boiler into manual, which is going to bypass the controls, right? The automatic control. And we're going to bring that boiler up, the pressure up. So it's still got water coming in it. Pressure is going to start building. All right. And eventually, what's going to happen? It's going to come to a point where it's going to lift the safeties. And so it lifts the safeties. We verifying that, obviously, we want to verify that the gauge is accurate. All right. And then we're verifying that it's actually lifting at the pressure, at least one of the valves, because you could have staggered valves. We won't get into great detail about that. You could have, but you got to have one at or below the maximum allowable working pressure of the actual, the boiler. And so then you verify that it actually lifts at the set point. But then while you're doing that in the presence of the inspector, he's satisfied that it's lifting. But then you go on to check the capacity. It's called an accumulation test. And so as the steam pressure continues to rise and it goes past that set point, the code allows for it, in the case of a steam boiler, it's 6%, okay, above the set point. In the case of a water boiler, it's 10%. So an example would be I have a safety valve that has a set point of 100 PSI. That safety valve opens at 100 PSI. The pressure continues to rise as long as that pressure on that boiler does not exceed 106 PSI. The capacity of that safety valve is sufficient. So now what we've done is we've done a pop test and we performed an accumulation test. And that should be satisfactory to the inspector that those valves are sufficient. Well, this particular client had a new inspector come in. Same company, new insurance inspector. And he comes in and he says, nope, we haven't changed these valves out in a while. I want these valves changed. And they did it. They got theirs. So they call it. Well, the next time I'm in there, because I've worked a lot of consulting services for them, and I'm in there, says, yeah, I said, we got two new valves coming in. And I was like, oh, something happened? No, the inspector just made a change. I said, hold on. But you told them annually you do a pop test and accumulate. Yeah, but he said we haven't changed these in a long time, so we need to change. And I got on the phone because, I'm not the chief inspector anymore, but they knew who I was. And I didn't have any authority to tell them anything. I just very politely just told them, I said, you realize not only did you cost them, and I can't remember what it was till I saw the invoices, like 12 to 15,000 or 12,500. I can't remember. I said, but now they have to not only do that, now they're going to have to pay the cost to get somebody to come in, take these down, take these out. And what do you want them to do with them? Well, they can throw those, they throw those other ones out or get them rebuilt. Okay, so now they got to take them in, and it costs them 12.5, whatever. And now you want them to send them off, and now they're going to get rebuilt. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a point where you say, are these things going to wear out and they need to be replaced? But do they really? Are they operating properly? Do we do a manual pull of them every 6 months? Yeah. So they lift, yes. Did they lift during the pop test? Yes. Did they relieve the capacity? Yes. Then why are we replacing them? Now, I could get somebody on this, somebody commented, and I'd love it. Call me and tell me, like, hey, you should do this. I may have a safety valve expert that chimes in and says, well, they have a shelf life on the boiler. I know they have a shelf life on the shelf. Do they have a shelf life on the boiler? I've never heard of that. So, with that being said, how often should you do it? You can go to hot water boilers where it matters what style type. It can be anywhere from a 3 year. Usually you see a 3 year cycle or a 2 year cycle. Manual testing. I stay away from manually testing, full on manually testing temperature and pressure valves because of the components that they're made. I like to call it whispering the valve a little bit, where you make sure that you hear the little whisper of it lifting, because it's not getting the full force of and not reseating. There's nothing worse than pulling the TMP valve on the side of a water heater and it doesn't close back, and now you're the bad guy in the room. I told you one time before, I said, man, it's a little sneaky. I'd say, hey, come here, maintenance guy, crawl up on that ladder and go ahead and pull that tri lever on that valve. Is like it doesn't seat back, and they say, well, you told me to pull it. I said, well, it's pretty much telling you it's time to be replaced anyway.
So and you talked about it, and I was going to ask you about this. So it's officially called an accumulation test. So when you say put the boiler in manual, and I've never witnessed this, but essentially you just have to jump out all the safeties, because there's no switch that says on a typical packaged boiler that you just switch over and will automatically jump out all the safeties. Like, you have to physically jump out the high limit and the operator in order to get the boiler to fire.
Actually is, if you look, so let's take, and it really matters about the controls you've got. So if you have a Hawk system on a boiler, it's going to be on your HMI screen. You switch that over to manual, it will bypass. Have you experienced where it won't when you put it into manual?
Okay, so yes, so when you have a little higher control system, but I
Uh-huh.
was just talking about, hey, I have a Honeywell 7800 with
Uh-huh.
manual controls.
Uh-huh.
There's no way you can flip the burner into manual, but
Uh-huh.
there's no way to manually bypass the high limit other than with a wire to get because the
On
operator and high limit are always going to be in the circuit with like a standard 7800 with like linkage control on a very simple boiler.
Are you saying on your operating control? On your operating control or on your high limit control?
Both. There's going to be never a switch that's going to bypass those. You would
Okay.
have to make a wiring change.
That it all depends on how the system is wired. What type of boiler did you experience this on in regards to a 7800? What boiler
Uh,
manufacturer?
just,
Any of them?
yeah, Clearbrook's, Kiwani, Hearst. If you just have like a boiler from the 70s that
Mm.
has a 7800 and has all standard controls, no parallel positioning system, they're all going to be wired slightly different. But when I read about an accumulation test, basically the only way, unless you have a special control system, the only way to get the boiler to fire past the safety valve set points are to remove the electronic operator and electronic high limit
Or
from,
reset them.
well, I guess if when they can only be set up to the safety valve set point. So if you're trying to do an accumulation test and you want 6%, when they shut down the boiler, say like at 100 psi, and you wouldn't be able to see if it gets up to 106?
Well, because your controller, if we're talking about a simple pressure troll, okay, we're talking about a simple pressure troll. That pressure troll is going to, in most cases, is going to can be set beyond the safety valve. It's whatever the range of that controller is. Every scenario is going to be a little bit different in that case there, but I know that with the RM 7800, it's going to have, obviously, RM stands for relay module. That's what it is. And it's going to be going off of whatever input and output signals that come into it. So if I were to take and set my control, no different than, let's say I'm going to test my high limit control. How do I test my high limit control? I would dial it down to within the range of my boiler operating to trip it, right? And then I'll dial it back up.
If you have 150 pound set pressure on your safety valve, you'll typically, if you have a Honeywell pressure control, you'll have 150 psi range on the pressure control. So even if you set them at 150, the boiler is going to be shutting down at 150 psi, and you're not going to be able to witness that the pressure doesn't rise 6% above the safety valve pressure set point. So the only way to truly witness an accumulation test is to remove all the steam pressure safeties from the control, and you're essentially putting 100% of the operation of the steam pressure into the people watching the boiler run. The flame safeguard is still going to make sure there's going to be a flame in the chamber,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
but you are watching the gauge and saying, if it rises above 106 and
Mm.
like keeps going, we're the ones that are shutting it down versus an electronic control.
That's right. No, and you're right on that. It all depends on the controls you have in place. So let's take, for instance, you'll run into this. If I look at a high limit control, okay, my boiler has an MAWP of 150. Okay? Let's just use that as an example. And I'm using a pressure troll that has a range that goes up to 150, right? And my safety valves are set at 150. So this is very common of what you see, because you're right. If I put it in manual, what I'm in essence doing is I'm overriding any modulating control I have, right? Which I'm the modulating control. The operating control, if I have a control that's set higher than that point, which you shouldn't, but you can, I can take it up to 150, right? Let's say I take them both up to 150. If my safety valves are set at 150, you're absolutely right. I have no room to go without bypassing. But I'm doing that that's why it has you do that in the presence of an inspector. Does that make sense? So when they talk about doing an accumulation test, it's always done in the presence of the inspector, because you're able to verify that, if in this case here, if I'm going up and above 150, okay, I'm going to 159, right? If I'm bypassing those safety controls, because let's be honest, the operating pressure control is the on off, but in our industry, we really call it the high limit. What do we call the true high limit pressure control? We call it the
Oh,
high, right? Have you ever heard
I've
that term?
always operating
Yeah.
pressure control and high limit pressure control.
And so some in the industry, when you hear it, you'll hear the term, and this is a good one. You can check that one off. Hey, I learned that. Is that they will call it the high set point, okay, on the operating pressure control. That's why most do not, even though it's an operating pressure control, it's the first line of safety, okay? Because there's nothing in the code that tells you when the boiler has to turn on. It only says when it turns off, when steam is satisfied, right? And so the high limit control is the high. So you've got a high set point, the highest we want to go, and then you have a high. So I teach that to people because I said, you may hear this term. I'm going to teach you. It's called a high limit pressure control, and it's an operating pressure control, right? Right. We're all good. We're all good. But then if I have a big boiler, like I have a client in Georgia that has a huge boiler system, right? They have a high limit control, and then they have a high limit control. And you're like, well, where's my operating pressure control? Well, you don't have one because this control is what the code requires. Is I'm going to turn it off when my operating pressure has been met. That's your high. Then it's I've got to have another one that has a manual reset attached to it just in case this first one fails. Now, let's go back to our initial discussion, which you brought up a very valid point. It's how am I going to get past when I'm doing an accumulation test? Because if I do have a control set point, which I'm probably not going to, because codes probably gets in the way of this one, I can adjust it beyond that point. So if I have a operating pressure control at 150, a high limit control that goes up to 150, and an MAWP that's 150, but I have a safety valve that's set at 100 psi. So when I do my accumulation test, what am I going to take it to? 106. Okay. That valve has a capacity limit of that boiler at that PSI. So that valve is going to lift at 106 or 100 PSI. It is going to continue to rise because I'm going to continue to accumulate. I'm continuing to increase the capacity to verify that I am relieving the capacity of that safety valve. And that is determined by the pressure. So now your question about is right, spot on about the operating pressure control and the high limit. If they're all at that same level, do you know how many I've seen where the high limit control and the safety valve are set at the same? They'll have a safety valve set at 150. They only operate up to 100 psi, but they'll have a safety valve set at 150, and they'll have their high limit set at 150 as well. Doesn't make a lot of sense. That's the situation there that the inspector has to be involved because the inspector's got to be able to say, "Hey, I cannot have my high limit more than my MAWP, right? Can't have that by code." And so, therefore, what is my operating pressure? If my operating pressure is 100, my safety valve is set at 100, my high limit set, I can manipulate that without doing any manual bypass, and because then I can lift up my operating pressure control as long as I can. But if they're all the same, they're all 150. Operating pressure control max is 150. Safety valve is 150, and your high limit is 150. Yeah, you absolutely have to do some wiring and bypass of that system. So I'm sorry if that kind of confused you there. My brain was thinking, I'm not going to have everything set at the same up here. I've got some wiggle room in between. And that's where I didn't understand.
Yeah, I understand. I just, in my learning desire, am kind of disappointed that I've never done an accumulation test.
Go do one, man. They're fun.
Yeah, I've never had an inspector that said, hey, jump out all the safeties and let's see what this bad boy makes. Question: in the McDonnell Miller manuals for the floats, it says replace the control every 5 years. Is that a marketing and CYA? Because I've had customers and or people reach out, say like, hey, it says this in the manual that we need to replace every 5 years.
Are you talking about the head?
Yeah, like
Replace the
like
head?
a 150 head. Any McDonnell Miller float device, if you look in the manual, it'll say we recommend you replace this every 5 years. That is
Mm.
just a manufacturer's recommendation and not a absolute must, correct?
Yeah, I think it is. It's like anything else that's out there that if it's mechanical, it has the potential to break. The issue all comes around the two different type of, well, I would say it's more like three. It's the people don't care about operation. They're going to flip a switch and leave the boiler. Then you have the people that think they're really safe with operating their boiler and half step it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And then you got people that are religiously every single day, they're doing what they've been taught to do by somebody that kind of knows what they're talking about. They're trained properly and they're documented. If I had the operation, some people, if you're not testing it every single day, your McDonnell Miller or whatever low water cutoff device you have at a bare bones minimum, Eric, should be tested at least once a day, once every 24 hours. Okay. Auxiliaries, bare bones minimum should be tested once a week. Okay, auxiliary low water cutoff. The reason I usually say once a week is that for those units that have a probe type auxiliary low water cutoff that's installed, let's say it's installed on the top of a fire tube boiler per se, to get that to actually do a real world test, I'm going to have to drain the water level down. That's why we've talked about this. I highly recommend my clients that have a boiler with a top mounted probe, especially on your fire tube boiler, is to go off the opposite side of the main low water cutoff and put in a column. You can keep it as a probe. That's fine. They make them. And usually like a war control or something like that, and put a separate water column for that probe to be mounted in so that you can test it the same way you do your main. The only difference is when the boiler shuts off, now we have to test the manual reset and make sure it starts back. In that case, you do them on a regular basis. You can do them both, and boiler will be back up and running in 5 minutes. All right. If I'm that type of company, I'm not worried about it. Where the manufacturer is going to come in is it's almost an insurance policy type thing. It's like if I tell you to change this out every 5 years, you're not going to have a nuisance breakdown. Okay. Now I know that in some jurisdictions, holding parts on the shelf, and I'm not a tax person, but I understand that you get taxed on some of that stuff that's sitting on your shelf. Somebody smarter than me about that can answer better, but um, you keep those parts and pieces and controls handy, right? I'm not worried about the column itself. I'm worried more about the head, right? So if I have that component there, or if I have a service company that's right down the road that I can send Eric, the expert, over to go grab me a head and come wire it on, just maintain your stuff, man. You maintain it, it's going to last for years. I've seen them out there where, go for a decade without seeing a new head. And then you'll walk in one day and you see this, sparkling black head with no dust and dirt and grime on it. Say, what happened? Oh, it went out on us. Oh, okay. So that was 10 years, not 5. But
Or the new health and safety manager came into the boiler room and they found out that they had mercury in their boiler room, and they're like, we can't have mercury on our
oh
site.
my,
We need to
well,
replace all
yeah.
those switches.
Okay. Yeah. Mercury switches were the rock stars, man. I'm going to tell you, yeah, I get it. We've talked about this where in a service company, you see this tin can and you look in there, you see all these little bulbs of mercury where when they discarded the old, they would clip those so they'd have proper disposal. I get that, but those mercury switches, they they were very reliable back in their day. Snap switches, they gotten better, but yeah, mercury is pretty good stuff to have.
Last thing I want to mention before we wrap up is and you touched on it, bringing an outside company for the sake of that poor person that is coming in for that outside company and the sake of the inspector. How soon should a owner shut down their boiler? Because when I was doing this, I had a well-meaning intentioned operator when I would show up at 7 a.m. and the inspection's at 10 a.m. And they said, hey, I came in early at 5 a.m. to shut down this boiler that's operating at 120 PSI for you to give it time to cool down. I'm like, oh, thank you. It still has 80 pounds of pressure on it, and I'm supposed to be opening this thing.
Yeah.
How soon should we be shutting down our boiler before an inspection?
Great question. 24 hours is my answer at a minimum, but that is a knee jerk response. Here's the thing. Let me kind of get a little bit more background information. What was his procedure for quote unquote cooling off the boiler?
I've had people do some wild things, but most, in my experience, it's just, hey, turn off the burner switch and let the boiler sit. In the case that there's multiple boilers, you're going to isolate the header valve so that, as we all know, non-returns leak back. I think that's a scam. Non-returns, none of them ever hold past 2 weeks old.
I've heard that for years. Non-returns, and the problem is do they really open their bleed valve in between?
Yeah.
Do they even have one? Yeah, I get you.
But
I'm with you.
isolate the boiler, isolate the feed water, and just allow it to naturally cool is the typical instruction. But I've had people power cool them where they'll set the fan into purge, and that will work. But I've also had people drain the boiler hot.
No, ever.
Which is
never
not good.
Never.
And then try to refill it, which
shoot me now. Yeah.
Well,
let me start a service company and make money retubing boilers.
Tell the listeners why you should never drain a hot boiler.
Well, yeah, here we go, and I love this. So this is a good last question to have. Number one, let's talk about your scenario that you had. You said that you had a client that came in, they were running I think you said 125 PSI at 5 in the morning. You show up at 10, 5 hours later.
Well,
and it's.
Yeah. So they shut down the boiler at 5. Yeah, I show up 5. At 7. Inspectors come at 10. 7.
Oh, you show up at 7. Inspectors coming at 10. It still has 80 pounds. Okay. So here's the issue is let's talk about temperature. So if I'm at 100 PSI, I'm 338 degrees. 150s, 366. So that makes 125, I think somewhere around 350, 353, something like that, right? 353. That's hot, man. That's hot. So how are we going to get rid of that energy? Because that's what it is. Okay. Is we're talking about the energy. Energy, we do not create it or destroy it. It's just transferred, right? We all know that. Well, we don't all know that, but You and I know that. So what does that mean? So that means we get the energy from a boiler, from the fuel that's in the gas that we're putting in the boiler. Then we transfer it over to the water. I think we've talked in the past about the campfire paper cup trick, where you take a Dixie cup, little paper Dixie cup or whatever, you poke a stick or a rod through it, fill it up, so you can fold it over the fire, right? And it's got water in it, and you're holding it over the fire, and the paper cup burns or doesn't. No, it does not burn. Why does it not burn? Because it has water in it, and the energy from the fire is transferring through the paper cup over to the water that is going to start to boil and evaporate, right? Until the point that the water is gone. At that point, the paper cup will catch on fire. So now let's talk about what happens when we have a boiler that's running. And one of the reasons why we want to get away from excessive cycling of a boiler. What does that mean? That means a boiler turns on and turns off a lot, goes through its cycle, right? Why do we want to get away from excessive cycling? We want our boiler to come up and stay up, right? Every time that boiler goes down, what continues to run for a period of time? The blower motor, okay? So if heat transfers from hot to cold, transfers from the flame gases to the water, whenever that boiler turns off and we start blowing air through it, now which direction is the heat transferring? It's transferring from the hot water over to the cooler air. Now, if we drain off the water from that boiler, we have nothing to be able to transfer the energy of those hot tubes to. So if we have nowhere for that hot gases that got shut off by that boiler being turned off, those tubes are still hot. There's still energy in those tubes. We're not blowing any air through that boiler, and we decide we want to drain that boiler down. First off, if we were at 125 psi, 353-ish degrees, where are we dumping that water
Right.
to? Okay, we're going to dump it to the drain. What do you think's going to happen? Hopefully, your blow down separator, the after cooler, is working properly. Okay, because if it's not, we're sending very, very, very hot water to a drain system that is going to cause some damage. Drains, you cannot send water over 140 degrees Fahrenheit to your drain system. Okay, that's one. Then somebody's going to be smart and say, hey, I know how to cool this down. Same way I cool down my hot soda, I'm going to put ice in it. Have you ever poured a warm soda over cold ice? What
Uh,
immediately happens to that
Cracks,
ice?
yeah.
It starts to crack. You hear it cracking. It's thermal shock, one way or the other. Well, now what we have is we've got the opposite of that. We still have these hot tubes that we are going to inject cooler water into. No different than the possibility of a dry fire condition that happened at Dana, right? Where we had hot tube, the burner still operating, and then we injected cool DA water, feed water into the boiler that caused a thermo shock or dry fire explosion. Well, we may not have the same force, but what's going to happen is, and I say that you might have the same force if it's still hot enough and you drain that water down, what's going to happen is these hot tubes are going to start to try to release their energy, and they are going to start trying to pull away from the tube sheet. Then when I put cool water into it, you're going to have a rapid flash that then is going to completely pull these tubes away from the tube sheet. And the majority of those tubes are probably rolled into place and not welded in place. All right. So, how to cool that boiler down properly? Well, just like you said that somebody would get into a purge position and mechanically cool it down. Absolutely. Okay. So what are we going to do? Let's say we have the Honeywell RM 7800 series. Well, we turn the boiler off, get it to cycle down, goes to cycle back on. Once it gets into the purge cycle, we're going to reach up and we're going to flip the switch that's on the top of the blue cube from run to test. What that does is that will hold that particular boiler. We could do it at any stage. We could, if I wanted to check to see if I'm getting a spark, right? Before I do anything else, I can switch it in and to switch it into test, and it will sit there and spark, spark, spark for me to go back and look to see if I'm actually getting a spark if I'm by myself, right? So I can do that when it's during purge. And so I flip that switch, I hold it into purge, and I just sit there and let it. And so now what we've done is we've then reversed heat transfer, haven't we? And so now the air that's being sucked in from the boiler room is going to be substantially cooler than the water that's in the boiler. And so what's going to happen is so now I am going to start blowing the air. The air is going to get warmer. It's going to leave the boiler. And now we have heat exchange occurring, and that water will start cooling down, or the steam inside of the boiler. This is why we still shut our valve, even though, Eric, like you said, non-return are just what they are. And so then the water will start to condense, or the steam will start to condense in the boiler. Your water level, yes, will start increasing. You will get, if it's only one boiler in the system, you need to start opening up your drain valves for your steam traps, or you're going to start flooding that system again, and eventually that boiler is going to cool down. So don't wait till the last minute.
The best plan is one that is written down and followed. And I understand there's situations that are not ideal, but boiler safety is your safety, and off-putting boiler safety or not doing a proper inspection to try to maintain production or all that stuff is a short-term vision. I want to thank you for sharing your insights.
Yeah.
If you all haven't listened, go back to listen to episode 55, where he told a little bit more of his backstory and also dropped 2 more hours of knowledge. Marty is a very knowledgeable person, and I appreciate having him on. How can people find you?
Well, you can go look our training page. We got a training page, Boisco Training Group, BOISCO traininggroup.com. And we can go there, you can go there and find information on training. And then if you just need my assistance, by all means, you can always give me a call. The numbers are on that page for any consulting work and stuff like that. But we just really have the one training page website, and get all my information.
Thank you. That was great. I learned a lot, and hopefully the listeners learned too, and appreciate having you on again.
Anytime, brother. I appreciate you and the work you do, Eric, and got a lot of years of you in this industry, brother. It's good to know that when I decide to go on to play golf full time, which my wife never going to let happen. But I know that we have guys like you that are out there going have picked up the reins and gonna troop on.
Absolutely. It's never too late to start learning.
That's right.
You can do it when you're 20, you can do it when you're 30. Don't don't I try to tell young people all the time, don't wait till you're 50 to be an expert. You can be very knowledgeable at 25. Yes, understand that you don't have
Absolutely.
experience, but if you put in the work, you can be knowledgeable at 25 and 30. This belief that you can't know anything till you're 50 years old is probably propagated by the people who are in their 60s and 70s, and who are the
Mm.
people who had 100 question written tests that were all long form math and said, this is the only
Yeah.
way to do it.
No
So
way, brother. No way. That's the one thing. The last thing I'll leave you with is people out there that are the younger. You guys are the future. You guys and gals are the future, and be open to those that do have the knowledge, because those people, you'll learn a lot of good, you'll learn some bad. Just know how to filter through it and keep learning.
always be learning. Absolutely.